modestly dressed woman was thrown out of a luxury boutique for not looking high-class enough. But just 1 hour later, her true identity left the entire store speechless. What happens when those who discriminate are forced to bow before the very person they once looked down on? On the glittering Rodeo Drive, where diamonds and arrogance lie side by side in every display window, a woman walked in as if she'd wandered from the common world into the realm of the elite. Emily Walker, 45, wore a simple white t-shirt, pale gray joggers, and her hair tied neatly back. She didn't look like someone about to drop $85,000 0 cents on a gift. And in the eyes of the staff at Elegance Boutique, that was her first sin. The heavy glass door of elegance closed behind Emily, shutting out California's blinding sunshine and ushering her into a frigid world perfumed with Chanel and condescension. No one looked up. No one spoke. The chime of the doorbell seemed to announce an unwelcome nuisance. She made her way straight to the case of vintage watches, where a 1960 masterpiece lay still, as if waiting to be claimed by the right person. Emily had done her research. The perfect birthday gift for James Walker, her husband, one of Los Angeles's most powerful investors. "May I help you?" The voice came from a saleswoman with tightly pinned hair, a cold face and eyes that scanned Emily head to toe, as if she'd dragged in dust from the plebeian world. Veronica Green, her name tag gleaming on her left chest. Didn't smile. "That watch?" Emily pointed, her voice calm. Veronica's brow furrowed, as if she'd just heard a request to buy the building itself. "That one is $85,000, she emphasized, as if the number alone could make a customer vanish in a puff of smoke. "Yes, I know. I'd like to see it." Veronica hesitated, not because she didn't understand, but because she was thinking of the budget accessories collection downstairs, where people who looked like this were usually steered. But Emily stood her ground, unruffled, just waiting. With a reluctant glance, Veronica retrieved the key, opened the case and placed the watch on a velvet pad, keeping her distance as if facing a potential thief. "Only 5 exist in the world," Veronica declared in a flat tone, clearly meant not to impress but to warn. "Perfect," Emily nodded. "I'll take it." An uncontrollable twitch crossed Veronica's face. "Perhaps you'd like to discuss financing options?" "No need. I'll pay in full." At that moment, Brandon Carter, the boutique manager, appeared, striding out like a knight defending his kingdom from an intruder. He flashed a cold, forced smile and asked Veronica, "Is there an issue?" "The customer is interested in the Chronomaster." Brandon turned to Emily, his gaze carrying an uninvited appraisal. "Ma'am," his voice smooth as velvet but sharp as a blade, "we have a policy for high-value items. Financial verification is required." "I don't have my card on me," Emily replied, "but I assure you payment won't be an issue. My husband will be here shortly." "Your husband?" Brandon repeated, his tone dripping with open skepticism. His eyes flicked over her casual attire like a verdict, needing no signature. "I'd like to finalize this before he arrives. It's a gift. We can't proceed without verification," Brandon said, his words slicing like scissors through silk. Then he turned to greet a famous actress who'd just walked in, his demeanor instantly shifting from icy to stage-lit warmth. Emily was left standing, or rather dismissed, in front of strangers, prying eyes, hushed whispers, and finally a subtle but scathing push toward the door, accompanied by the line, "People like you don't belong here." Emily Walker stood on the sidewalk, not crying. She didn't need to, because she knew, from that moment, the game had shifted, and perhaps they'd just insulted the wrong person. On Rodeo Drive, where everything is stamped exclusive, nothing is accidental. The footsteps, the glances, even the whispers, all are measured with the precision of an unspoken fashion show played out in everyday life. But that morning, in a rare moment of unscripted truth, Emily Walker was pushed out of that glitzy performance, not with words, but with a contemptuous look and a subtle shove, just enough to ignite a smoldering anger yet to erupt. She didn't cry. She didn't turn back. Instead, Emily walked along the boulevard, head held high, her eyes reflecting the interplay of light and shadow from a bruised pride. She needed a moment to catch her breath, to tuck her humiliation into a silent box, waiting for the right time to lift the lid. And then fate, or something more cunning, decided to step in with a strange whisper. She shouldn't have been treated like that. Emily turned. A woman stood a few steps away, middle-aged, elegant, with sharp eyes, as if she'd stepped out of a noir film. In her hand was a shopping bag from Elegance, the very boutique that had just cast Emily out like an invisible speck of dust. "I saw everything," the woman continued, her voice like silk laced with quiet fire, "and I saw what they didn't." Emily frowned. "Thank you for standing up for me, but I'm fine." "Oh, I'm not standing up for you," the stranger said with a slight smile. "I'm warning." That statement stopped Emily cold. In the woman's eyes was something beyond empathy, a secret or perhaps a truth waiting to be unveiled. "I used to work with Brandon Carter," the woman went on, her voice lower now, as if the air itself had ears. "He knows how to size people up, not by credit cards, by agendas." Emily tilted her head. "What do you mean?" "He didn't just insult you for your clothes. He insulted you because he thought you didn't have the influence to make him pay for it." The woman paused, then gently placed a hand on Emily's arm. "But I saw how you stood tall, unapologetic for existing, and I know he just crossed the wrong person." A car horn sounded faintly in the distance. The woman stepped back, her gaze softening. "I won't give you my name, but if you need a witness, I'll show up." Before Emily could ask more, the woman slipped into a black car, closing the door as if she'd never been there. But her whisper lingered, clear, sharp as a thin blade. Emily stood still, her mind reeling. This was clearly more than a shopping mishap. Something lurked behind the pristine glass of that boutique, a system of judging others based on prejudice and curated contempt. And when a familiar SUV pulled up nearby and James Walker stepped out, right on time, right on cue, Emily knew this was no longer just her story. James's eyes scanned the scene and locked on his wife standing on the sidewalk. Without a word, he knew something was wrong. His eyes narrowed, his jaw tightened subtly, the telltale reaction of a man unaccustomed to seeing his wife hurt. "What happened?" he asked, his voice soft but cold. Emily pressed her lips together, ready to tuck it all away as she often did, but then the stranger's whisper echoed back. "I'll show up if you need." She looked straight into James's eyes, her voice steady. "You're going to want to hear this, but not here." The story had just turned a new page, and this time Emily Walker wasn't standing alone. Under the midday sun stretching across Rodeo Drive's polished stone pavement, everything seemed to hum along, in its perfect rhythm. Cars gliding smoothly, high heels clicking in steady cadence, and the glances of passers-by skimming over anything that didn't fit the mold. But Emily Walker stood there, alone, silent, and out of step with that rhythm. She was no longer angry, nor confused. Her emotions had settled into a smoldering void, one too deep to voice, too real to deny. The manager's humiliating words, the saleswoman's scornful gaze, they lingered like the aftertaste of a shameful melody that refused to fade. Emily wondered what hurt so much. Was it being misjudged? Or was it that she herself wasn't sure if she still belonged to the world she'd once stood beside? She walked slowly along the sidewalk, fingers tracing the strap of her bag, eyes cast down. Each step swallowed a piece of the resentment she refused to let show, not out of pride, but out of dignity. At the corner, a familiar black SUV pulled up. The door swung open, and James Walker stepped out, polished in a deep navy suit, tie knotted neatly as always. His eyes scanned the scene, cool and composed as ever, until they found her. Their gazes met, It wasn't shock or alarm in his look. It was a pause, a fleeting stillness where the world around them seemed to halt. No one spoke, no one moved. Only a quiet connection passed between them, where everything that needed to be understood already was. He walked toward her quickly. No questions, no demand for explanations. But Emily spoke anyway, her voice so soft it barely rose above the breeze. "I didn't want you to see me like this." James said nothing. His eyes flicked away for a brief second as if to rein in something clawing at his chest. Then he looked at her again, gentle but resolute. "I want to see every version of you," he said, soft but certain. "Even when you feel like you've been looked down on." Emily turned away, her eyes stinging. She didn't want to cry. Didn't want to weaken the dignified silence she was holding on to. But his calm unraveled her defenses. "What happened?" he asked, his voice low. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "They didn't think someone like me could afford that gift." James nodded, as if unsurprised but far from accepting. His eyes grew colder, sharper, though he didn't rush. "I heard from a woman," he said quietly, "that my wife was thrown out of a store, in a very disrespectful way." Emily looked at him, and for the first time that morning, she felt she wasn't alone. "I thought about waiting for you to show up and explain," she said. "But if I did, the gift would lose its meaning." James gave a faint smile, not a joyful one, but one tinged with quiet ache. "The gift's still there," he replied, "but its meaning just got a whole lot deeper." They stood together for a long moment, saying nothing more. Amid the stream of people gliding past, they were like two strangers who'd once known each other, rediscovering something faded by years of living in excess and forgetting what it felt like to be judged by appearances. When James rested his hand lightly on her back, guiding her toward the boutique, Emily didn't speak, but inside she knew. That brief, silent meeting of their eyes had been the start of a new truth unfolding, a truth, this time, she wouldn't shy away from. The air in Elan Boutique froze solid, as if someone had slammed shut a furnace door in the dead of winter. Every chuckle, every light step on the marble floor stopped dead in its tracks, because James Walker had just walked in. No introduction was needed, no fanfare. The tall figure in a perfectly tailored navy suit, his purposeful stride and eyes sharp as a surgeon's scalpel were enough to draw every gaze in the store, only for them to immediately dart away. Marcus Devlin, the boutique's veteran manager, hadn't yet sensed the shift. He was still chuckling under his breath with two employees near the counter, mocking the pretend elegance of the woman in athleisure from that morning. Then the sound of James's shoes echoed clearly on the stone floor, and Marcus turned. His face stiffened instantly. It was as if an iceberg had shattered above his head. One moment safe, the next drenched in cold dread with no escape. "Good afternoon, sir. Welcome to Elan. How may I assist you today?" Marcus forced a polished smile, though the corners of his mouth twitched with instinctive fear. James didn't answer immediately. His gaze swept the store, lingering on each section. Every employee, every nearby customer froze, bracing for the tidal wave about to crash. Then his eyes settled on Emily Walker, who had just stepped in behind him. "I think you should pick a different watch," James said, his gaze still fixed on Marcus, his voice even, but each word laced with something on the verge of breaking loose. A birthday gift shouldn't be tainted by arrogance and short-sightedness. Marcus tried a strained laugh. "Sir, there seems to be a misunderstanding. If I had known this lady was—" James raised a hand, cutting him off. "No?" "Don't say if I had known. The problem is, you didn't think you needed to know anything to treat her that way." Marcus's face paled. Two employees behind him stepped back almost instinctively, as if afraid of being caught in the tightening grip of the mounting pressure. Emily remained silent. She didn't need to speak anymore. James's presence, his gestures, his words, they were a complete reversal of the humiliating morning she'd endured. "I want to buy the watch she chose," James said, stepping to the counter. "Now, and I want you to wrap it personally." Marcus's hands trembled as he unlocked the display case. Every movement felt scrutinized by the X-ray stare of a man who could shutter an entire chain of stores with one phone call. "We're deeply honored, sir," Marcus stammered. "Truly sorry for the earlier incident." James tilted his head slightly, but there was no trace of approval in his eyes. "Incident? That was your choice. You chose to insult a woman because of the clothes she wore, and that's something we'll discuss in detail with the board of Goldstone Retail. The good news? I'm on it." A faint "oh" escaped from a far corner of the store. The truth hit like glass shattering on the floor. This wasn't just a VIP. This was James Walker, one of the largest shareholders, a man who could overhaul an entire management structure with a single call. As Marcus wrapped the gift with shaking hands, James turned to his wife. "I can't change how everyone looks at you, but I can make them think twice before daring to judge you again." Emily met his gaze and gave a quiet nod. She said nothing. She didn't need to, because today the truth had turned the tables and the cost of contempt had been paid to the right person at the right time. "Perhaps we should talk about power," James Walker said, his voice cutting clearly through the opulent space that had now turned into a silent courtroom. Every eye locked onto him, the man who had just reduced Marcus Devlin from the regal stature of a veteran boutique manager to someone squirming on a hot seat. But the real shock was yet to come. James slowly pulled a business card from his suit pocket, unadorned, no flourish, just simple embossed text that sent chills through the elite. "Walker Investments, principal owner." James Walker Marcus blinked rapidly, his face shifting from pale to ashen to despair. "You, Walker Investments?" he stammered, barely believing what he'd heard. Emily Walker, standing beside him, quietly crossed her arms, her eyes calmly taking in the scene. No scolding, no accusations. She didn't need to do anything. James had already flipped the entire game. "Correct. And for your information, Marcus, my firm finalized its controlling stake in Goldstone Luxury Group, Elan's parent company, exactly 3 days ago," James continued, each word a cold blade slicing through the last remnants of the manager's arrogance. Among the staff, Veronica, the one who had tried to usher Emily out that morning, could no longer stand tall. She shrank back, clutching the countercloth like it was her last tether to existence in that room. "So," James went on, his eyes never leaving Marcus, "technically, when you asked my wife to leave this morning, you didn't just insult a customer. You insulted an owner." Marcus's mouth fell open, his only response, a trembling nod. "And instead of giving you the chance to slink behind the curtain with an immediate termination letter," James said, his voice low but forceful, "I'm choosing to do this publicly, so that not just you but every employee and customer here understands. Real power doesn't lie in appearances or embossed cards. It lies in how you treat someone when you think they're nobody." A faint clap echoed from a far corner, likely from a customer who got it. No one dared meet James's gaze now, but their eyes held respect and satisfaction, because justice was rarely served this swiftly and by the one with the ultimate authority. James turned to Emily, his expression softening noticeably. "Anything you'd like to add?" She shook her head slightly. "You've said enough." Then he turned back to Marcus. "I'm requiring the entire Elan team, including you and Veronica, to attend a service and bias awareness training starting next week. I want this place transformed. Not just a luxury boutique, but a place that serves with respect, no matter what a customer wears, says, or where they come from." Marcus swallowed hard. "Yes, I understand, Mr. Walker." James smiled, a cold smile, devoid of warmth, but heavy with the weight of a man who'd just taught the world a lesson with the power he wielded. "And if, after this training, I don't see a clear change," he concluded, "I'll make another choice. A new nameplate, a new manager, No further warning was needed. James Walker walked out of the boutique, his arm lightly around Emily Walker's shoulder, leaving behind a silent store and a lesson etched deep, that sometimes the quiet of a woman who's been dismissed is the storm that arrogant fools never see coming. Not all apologies happen behind closed doors, and sometimes justice needs an audience. On Monday morning, Elan Boutique buzzed with more activity than usual. Curious regulars flocked in after whispers of the showdown between James Walker, the enigmatic finance titan, and store manager Marcus Devlin spread like wildfire across Rodeo Drive. Everyone knew the story. Everyone wanted to see how it ended. In the boutique's spacious foyer, a small podium stood before the vintage watch still gleaming in its display case, the gift Emily Walker had quietly tried to buy but was denied. All because of joggers and a white t-shirt. James stood to one side, composed as if attending a project launch. Emily, dressed today in a simple gray dress, stood silently beside her husband, her gaze distant. In the hushed atmosphere, Marcus Devlin appeared, no longer in his commanding suit or with his practiced smile. Just a man stepping onto the stage with heavy footsteps and a trembling stack of papers in hand. He stood before the microphone, bowing slightly to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus's voice rasped. "Today, I stand here to do what I should have done long ago. Offer an apology." The silence was so thick you could hear the faint clink of a glass set on a marble table. "Last week I treated a woman with disrespect solely because of her simple appearance," he continued, eyes cast down. "I judged Emily Walker not by her character or dignity, but by the clothes she wore. And I was wrong." Emily stood still, her face betraying no emotion, but her hands clasped tighter. "I said things that, looking back, I can't believe came out of my mouth. I told her she didn't belong here, that she should go to another store, one more suitable. But the truth is, I'm the one unworthy of the position I held." He looked up, daring for the first time to meet Emily's gaze. "Mrs. Walker, I'm sorry for making you feel diminished, humiliated, just because I was too arrogant to see your true worth. No words can erase what you went through that day. But I hope you can accept this apology as the first step toward change." The room remained silent, but the eyes told a different story, no longer scornful, only humbled. James didn't need to speak. He'd done his part, bringing the truth to light. The hardest part, today, rested with Emily. She stepped toward the microphone, her voice soft but clear. "I wasn't going to come back here," she began. "No one wants to return to a place that belittled them. But I also realized, if I don't face this, others will keep being judged the way I was." She turned to Marcus, her eyes no longer angry, just weary with raw honesty. "I accept your apology, but don't say it to me, say it to everyone else who's been treated like I was. The people who walk in here with confidence and leave feeling they're not enough." A soft ripple of applause came from the guests, not for victory, but for those who dared to stand, for the one who was wrong and the one who'd been wronged. Marcus bowed his head deeply one last time. James placed a hand on Emily's back, gently guiding her from the podium as if leading her out of an old, painful chapter. Behind them, Elan's sign still sparkled, but today, something was different. A small crack in the gloss. A necessary crack, letting the true light of humanity and justice slip through. And sometimes, that's enough. True change doesn't come from a burst of righteous anger. It begins in a quiet moment, when someone chooses not to turn away but to move forward, rewriting a story that seemed already finished. A few weeks after the seismic public apology at Elan Boutique, a modest new sign appeared near the entrance. "We are committed to creating a fair, unbiased space. Every customer is welcome. No flourish, no excuses, just a promise, clear and public." And behind that promise was a name no one in the high-fashion world expected: Emily Walker. "You really want to work with us?" Caitlin, a new Elan employee, whispered as Emily stepped into the training office, repurposed from an old storage room. The young woman was still reeling from the news that the wife of James Walker, the woman once ushered out of the store, was now leading the customer service retraining program. "Not because I want to," Emily replied with a smile, "but because I think you all deserve a chance to do better than what the old system taught you." The air in the training room stilled. Those who had worked under Marcus Devlin, who had wittingly or unwittingly enabled bias, now sat upright, listening, as if this were their first lesson in human decency. On the projector, Emily began with a simple question. "If I'd walked in that day wearing a suit, carrying a designer bag, and with perfect makeup, would you have laughed at me?" No one answered. She nodded slightly, not needing a response. We've all been taught to spot the signs of a real customer, but who gets to define that? And how many times have we let appearances blur the true value of the person standing in front of us? Under the soft glow of the training room, Emily didn't preach. She told stories, her own and those of countless others, judged for choosing comfort over extravagance, for not looking like a VIP. "I'm not here to replace anyone," she said. "I'm here to help us build a space where people don't have to prove their worth with clothes, credit cards, or last names." As the session ended, Veronica, the one-time loyal assistant to Marcus, who had stayed silent during the incident, even contributed to that silence, lingered at the back. Today, her eyes were different. "Thank you for not choosing to destroy us," Veronica said softly. "You could have easily brought this whole place down." Emily shook her head. "Fairness isn't about tearing others down. It's about giving everyone a chance to rise." Across the city, James Walker sat in a boardroom reviewing customer satisfaction metrics for the Goldstein chain, the conglomerate he'd just taken control of. A note stood out on the first page. Elan Boutique. Breakthrough growth driven by a customer-proposed staff retraining program. Customer, his wife. That afternoon, when Emily returned home, she found James waiting with a small wooden box. Inside was the vintage watch she'd once meant to buy for his birthday, now carefully placed on black velvet, accompanied by a handwritten note. "Thank you for not just giving me time, but for using your own to change a small corner of the world." Emily looked at the watch, then at James. She didn't need to say anything more. Perhaps true change doesn't need fanfare. It only takes one person willing to stand firm, one person choosing to build instead of break, someone like Emily Walker. And from that moment, fairness was no longer a slogan. It became a choice, placed in the hands of everyone ready to believe that every person deserves kindness long before they step through the door. Justice doesn't always ring out with the gavel's strike in a courtroom. Sometimes it quietly takes root through small, courageous acts, like a woman returning to the place that once diminished her, not to seek revenge, but to plant a new perspective on human worth. 6 months after the incident at Elan Boutique went viral across social media, Emily Walker sat on a wooden chair in the city hall, where a ceremony honoring pioneers of social justice was unfolding. Beside her was James Walker, his hand gently holding hers as if to remind her they'd overcome it all, not through anger, but through faith in what was right. Tonight, we honor a woman who proved that kindness can be the sharpest spear, and quiet resolve can carry the weight of a revolution, the host announced, the spotlight falling on Emily, drawing every eye in the room to her. She stepped onto the stage, her walk as light as it had been when she left the boutique that day, head held high but not with pride. Just the steady confidence of someone who knew her value didn't lie in what others saw on the surface. "No one wants to be the center of a story about discrimination," Emily began, her voice calm but each word sinking deep. "But if my story can make someone rethink how they judge others, then it was worth it." The room was so still it seemed to hold its breath. "The day I was turned away from Elan, I could have gone back with my husband and let him use his financial power to retaliate. Instead, we chose to use our influence to create a new training program, not just for Elan, but for every store under the Goldstein Group." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the attentive crowd. including Elan's staff. People who once eyed her with suspicion, now looking at her with respect, because I believe true justice isn't just about punishing the wrongdoer. It's about giving them a chance to learn how to do right. Below the stage, Veronica, the one who'd once blocked her at the watch counter, nodded faintly. She was now the system-wide training coordinator, a transformation no one could have predicted. After the ceremony, a young woman approached Emily. She wore the uniform of a small fashion retailer, but her eyes shone brightly. "I just wanted to say, your story gave me the courage to apply for a manager position yesterday," the girl said. "I used to think only people dressed like they're in a magazine get taken seriously, but now it's different." Emily smiled, touching the girl's arm lightly. "You don't need to wear anything to prove you're worthy. You just need to walk with dignity." In the distance, James Walker watched quietly. To him, Emily wasn't just the wife who chose simplicity in every decision. She was proof that real strength lies not in status, but in choosing to stand for what's right, even when no one demands it of you. A week later, at Elan, a plaque reading, "We serve with respect, not with bias," was carved into the marble wall beneath the brand's logo, not as a temporary campaign, but as a vital commitment. Emily Walker didn't need an $85,000 0-cent watch to prove she belonged there. She left something far more valuable, a legacy of fairness, born from a misunderstanding, tempered by humiliation, and fulfilled through irreversible change. Justice sometimes doesn't need to shout. It arrives quietly, in eyes that have learned to see beyond appearances, in doors no longer closed by prejudice, and in every hand ready to reach for another no matter what they wear. That's how Emily Walker chose to affirm her worth and pave the way for hundreds of others to do the same. The story of Emily Walker and James Walker is not just a stunning reversal, but a wake-up call about justice and true worth. Thank you for joining us at Millionaire Heart Stories. See you in the next heart-touching tale.